Hello, good morning, and welcome all of you to the discussion on Nobel Prize Physics 2020, jointly organized by Astronomica, the Astronomy Club of St. Xavier's College, Ahmedabad, and Universe Science Forum. My name is Jahan Thakkar. I am the co-convener of the Universe Science Forum. Today, we're going to have a talk about a Nobel Prize in Physics of year 2020, which was announced recently. This year's Nobel Prize is awarded to the discovery that the black hole is a robust prediction of general relativity, and the other discovery, the discovery of a supermassive compact object, a supermassive black hole in the center of our own galaxy, the Milky Way. We have two speakers online who are going to talk about these discoveries. The first one is Mr. Arnav Chaturvedi, and the second is Mr. Jatin Tekani. They both are undergraduate physics students in St. Xavier's College, Ahmedabad, and they both are also active members of Astronomica, their club. They both are very interested in astronomy and astrophysics. So, not taking your much time, I request Arnav and Jatin to start their talk. One more thing, there will be Q&A session after the talk. You can post questions in comment section after the talk. Thank you. Over to you, Arnav and Jatin.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, John Bhai, for introducing us. So, as you all know, we have gathered here for this presentation on the Nobel Prize that was recently announced. So, I will request Dilip Bhai to start the slideshow. All right. So, I will be debriefing with the very firstly the work of Sir Roger Penrose, and then I'll be handing over this presentation to my companion, Jatin Tegani. So let's begin with this presentation. Please, next slide. All right. As we know that the Nobel Prize in Physics of 2020 was recently announced on 6th of October, and half the share of this Nobel Prize was awarded to Sir Roger Penrose, who is a mathematical physicist at the Oxford University, and the other half was shared by Reinhard Genzel and Andrea Ghez. So Reinhard Genzel is a German astrophysicist at the Max Planck Institute of Extraterrestrial Physics, and Andrea Ghez is an American astronomer at the University of California. So, Sir Roger Penrose was awarded half the share of the Nobel Prize he was able to show employing some mathematical tools that black holes in nature are actually just kind of natural consequence of general relativity, of the application of general relativity, one theory that was published by Sir Einstein earlier. And the other half was shared by these two. They discovered that there sits a supermassive compact object that we now know as Sagittarius A. It is a supermassive black hole. It sits at the very center of the Milky Way galaxy, that is our home galaxy. So here we can, of course, observe that these two have been, the shares of the Nobel Prize have been awarded for the research on black hole. So we should actually have an idea of what a black hole means exactly. What is a black hole? You can say that any massive object which collapses under its own gravity, and there's no outward, in the absence of an outward pushing force, there's no force that to counter the gravity that pushes it inwards. That is how it completely collapses under its own massive gravity, and therefore there's a remnant in the end, which comprises the singularity at the center and recovered by an event horizon, and it has an immense gravitational pull. Such a remnant is called a black hole. Okay, next slide. So here I have laid down the outline. I will simply tell you that we will begin with some introduction to some general terminologies. I will try to get you people familiar with some of the terms we are about to use, and then we will have a debrief on black holes, how this concept of black holes was introduced from the beginning, and a little bit of that. So since it's a popular talk, so I will not go in deep much. And then followed by how Sir Roger Penrose used and what tools he employed and how did he do that. And then we'll go for the very thing that how the supermassive black holes and the search began. That will be the part of my companion. And then followed by the brief overview with the work of Reinhard Genzel and NG, I guess. And then we will simply conclude the slideshow with the references and economy. All right. So next slide, please. Since I just said that we need to get familiar with some of the concepts and the terms that we are about to use. So first of all, I just simply told you about black holes. So now we should know black holes are a consequence of Einstein's general relativity. Okay, so the theory of general relativity was published in 1915. So Einstein realized that there might be some sort of other way to look at gravity. With the previously accepted notion of gravity was that it has when a mass is there, when a massive object is there, then there is a force that directs any body that is in its vicinity towards its center. But Sir Einstein, he refused to accept this long accepted notion of gravity, and what he did was, So what he did was he redefined gravity through his theory of general relativity. And how did he do that? Is that now he laid down the foundation of general relativity as if the space-time fabric. Space-time continuum was actually like a fabric. It behaved like a fabric. And what the mass did actually, the mass or the massive objects, the mass had to interact with this space-time fabric, and its influence is what the other nearby masses. You can simply imagine that as a simply stretched fabric, and the mass is able to interact with it and create an influence on it. And therefore, there's a curvature in the space-time. And this curvature is what is felt by other bodies which are less in mass, and therefore they, you can say, react to those curvatures or this influence on the space-time fabric, and that is what is consequently termed gravity. So what Einstein did is simply refuse the notion that gravity was a force. It was simply the consequence of the mass interacting with the space-time fabric. Several consequences of this theory of general relativity have been, of course, the well-accepted black holes, the bending of light around massive objects, even sun does, and of course, more or less, the supermassive black holes are considerably able to bend light, not because of any other factor, but just due to the very fact that space-time fabric itself is curved. So even if the light is following straight path, the path in this curvature happens to be a little bit curved in nature. Okay, next slide. Now I will try to debrief you with a few of this, how the concept of black hole was actually introduced at that time. After Sir Einstein published his theory of general relativity in 1915, it was quite doubtful about its consequence. And the thing was, at that time, he employed two complex mathematical tools, for example, tensors, that were not well understood at that time. People were not able to comprehend the physical significance of what the equations wanted to say. And this is actually generally quite essential thing to comprehend what the equations have to say in order to look for their real meanings in this real space-time and the universe. Of course, we have to look up for the consequence for them. However, the theory of general relativity was not well understood at that time, this mathematical construct and all. But some of the leading mathematical physicists of that time were able to comprehend, and in 1916, the very first solution to the Einstein's field equations of general relativity was published. It was Karl Schwarzschild, a mathematical physicist. And what he did was he evaluated this for a non-rotating mass, which was having a higher gravitational influence. And he evaluated it for the space-time fabric, how it behaves around such a mass. So here we are able to see a mathematical equation that is actually termed the Schwarzschild metric. This is actually a line element, the ds squared, And I'll tell you why he wrote this down for a line element, because space-time fabric, it can, we don't really about its behavior. So we have to look for each and every single line element, and its behavior might change on separate line elements. So we have to simply sum them all up. So we have to look at the each and specific line elements, which is why the question has been set just the way it is. Here, intriguingly, the first term with the time differential, dt squared, it has a coefficient there, which is 1 minus 2gm over c squared r, we can see. Here r, actually, in the denominator is a variable. And 2gm over c squared, that expression is what is now known as the Schwarzschild radius. I've written that down on the right-hand side of the equation. So when this denominator, you can say this r in the denominator, it is a radial coordinate, you can say, taken from the center of the object in consideration. Let's say for now, it's a massive object we are dealing with. So its center is where lies the origin. And from the distance will be what this r is trying to tell us. That is what the variable is. It's a radial variable. So as we try to move towards the center of this massive object, this r will simply tend to 0, because we are just simply approaching the origin. So the radial coordinate will be tending to 0. As that happens, here something unusual happens. That is, this first term will diverge. It will go to infinity. Something we are not familiar with, we cannot evaluate, we cannot comprehend. So and the second term, of course, right here, on the second term, with the radial differential, dr squared. In that denominator, you can see 2gm over c squared. And as this goes, this r is really tending to 0, this denominator will be diverging, and therefore, this whole expression on the second term, it will be close to 0, very much close to 0. But the first term, since it diverges, so what could be comprehended as the significance of such the origin? So it was termed the singularity, because here the density goes to infinity, and you can say that all the matter is now considered at this single point. That is what they were able to comprehend, but not well accepted though. The second intriguing fact about this equation is that as this radial coordinate, as for example, you are an observer and you are lying outside this massive object, and you try to move closer to it. As you try to move closer to it, when you reach the Schwarzschild radius from the radial point, of course, from the origin, the radial point is equal to the Schwarzschild radius. As you move from outwards towards the object, as you move and you trespass this Schwarzschild radius. So at the very Schwarzschild radius, your radial coordinate and the Schwarzschild radius become equal. So the variable is now equal to Schwarzschild radius. The first term, however, here you can see it will be 0. However, the second term now it will diverge. And this is what is called the event horizon of this black hole. Now that is known as the event horizon. And it is actually like an envelope which covers up the black hole and makes sure that there's no communication from the inside surroundings of the black hole and the outside the universe that we know. So once something goes inside the event horizon, there's no going back out of the black hole. Even at the speed of light, it's not possible. And this actually posed a problem at that time. Though the solution was published in 1916, but this posed a problem as many did not follow up that what did this try to mean. At that time, singularities were not accepted to occur naturally. They were more like mathematical errors. So they started to think for some different thing to prevent the formation of singularity. As such, the singularity cannot form in nature. They were not able, the scientific community was not able to accept this idea. We will see exactly what happened afterwards. So let's move to the next slide. Followed by Schwarzschild, another mathematical physicist, Kerr, was able to publish the results of general relativity, though in some other sense, now not for a non-rotating, but a rotating mass and a space-time fabric, how it behaves around this. Though the mathematical description was way too complicated, so I have not mentioned it here. But I will simply give you an insight to what it meant and how it solved some of the problems. So it was published in 1963. Now you can see here that after the first solution was valid The Favaret solution was published in 1916, and then followed by this solution, which is published in 1963. So there was about, like, you can say, in lump sum 40 years when the general relativity was remained in dispute. It was not well accepted, and so Einstein had to hear so many things about it that it might just be wrong. And this is not a space-time fabric. So it remained in dispute. And then Kerr set out with his own solution for now a rotating mass, which had an axial symmetry, and the space-time fabric around it behaved sort of it was like just the way you can imagine a whirlpool in water, or a cyclone. You can simply imagine that just that way. The space-time fabric had to distort around it too as it rotated. Now, one of the problems that still it had was that it also led to the formation of a singularity. But now, however, intriguingly, since the mass was rotating, so the field equations laid different construct for the matter to be contained inside it. When this sort of object underwent its own gravitational collapse and there was no outward pushing force that were to counteract gravity, so now this all matter was to be contained in just a single ring. So you can actually term this a ring singularity. In layman terms, it is known as ringularity. Sometimes people often say that. So that is how it actually worked out from the Kerr solution. And of course, this Kerr solution was also able, since it solved it out for a rotating mass, so it also gave rise to the accretion disks that a black hole can have, and several phenomena which were to be associated. And of course, it is a more generalized thing. As you know, all these celestial objects that we have been encountering till now, be it the moon or be it the sun, be it the supermassive black holes, M87, the image of which was recently announced, released in 2019, they all appear to have some sort of a non-zero spin. They do spin. They do have the rotation. So the Schwarzschild solution was way too trivial, way too easy. It was like that was not kind of realistic in nature. But now the Kerr solution can be actually linked to something physical, physically appearing in the nature. Therefore, Sir Roger Penrose decided to use some of its solution, like some of its properties, that the rotating mass and its influence in his own work. Next slide. So now, since even the Kerr solution had the formation of singularity, but both the Kerr solution and the Schwarzschild solution, they were not able to show that is it really necessary to employ general relativity, or there be a skipped way, or maybe we can use some sort of a different theory so we can prevent the formation of singularity. So what the scientific community wanted was that since singularity were not accepted at that time, so they just tried to prevent or unaccept anything that was trying to tell us that singularity was forming actually. So Sir Roger Penrose, what he did was he tried to set out with his own mathematical framework. He decided to prove that singularities were real, and not only that, they were actually a natural consequence of general relativity. Means that we can actually solve down the equations of general relativity, the field equations, and we can work out that singularities do exist and do appear in nature too. Be it not be the case of a single point like singularity, but it might be a ring singularity, but it does occur in nature. So he introduced two mathematical frameworks that were essentially trap surface, and there was another application of conformal transformations. So here conformal actually means that the angles remain invariant, angle is intact. You can simply imagine that, for example, you have two lines, and they are inclined at each other at some sort of an angle. Some angle, say 45 degrees. Now, if you, for example, these lines, the length you took for them was 1 meter each. This was 1 meter and that was 1 meter too. And the angle between them is 45 degrees. When you scale them up, for example, that now they are 2 meter each, but still the angle is remaining invariant. It is just the same. Even if you were to scale them down, like you were to keep them 0.5 meters each, but still the angle still remains same. So such a transformation is just a trivial example of a conformal transformation. And that is what he employed here. And in the trap surface, the diagram, it shows, you can say, simply see this a ring singularity, what he used from Kerr solution, and a rotating mass, And there you're able to see that when this rotating mass generally is set into existence or set into solutions, such a rotating mass with a high gravitational pull, it develops some sort of characteristic regions, which are namely, for example, the ergosphere, and then followed by some of this the horizon. Actually, due to the rotation, actually what happens is that the event horizon is not the only horizon it has. In fact, from inside, due to the rotation, since now the matter will try to collapse into the black hole, but due to the rotation of black hole from the radial coordinate, from the origin, there will be a force that you can say the centrifugal force that will try to pull it out to, you can say that, throw it out. So it's more or less, it develops two horizons. It's like an kind of envelope. The outer horizon is namely the event horizon mainly, and the inner one is the then generally termed the inner horizon, inner event horizon, you can say. And that in between, the shaded region, that is what is known as a trap surface. Actually, you can see there's just not one trap surface. As this is a kind of dissected diagram, you can say there was supposed to be a 3D diagram. It's kind of dissected and it is trying to show you. So here you're able to see that the trap surfaces actually are two-dimensional surfaces. You can imagine that to be a circle, like for instance, a circle. So such a two-dimensional surface, and we will talk about them in a later slide. But now here, an essential point to note down is that they cover up whole of the surface of this black hole, and they work out their way to the formation of singularity that we will be familiarizing us with in the next slide. All right. So before we get into this concept about how this employed, how the mathematical framework was employed, we need to get ourselves familiar with another concept, that is a light tone. I think many of you might be knowing about a cause and effect. For example, me working out in this presentation yesterday, rendering some last moment changes and presenting it today. So these changes are retained here. So you can simply say that was a cause and effect. Another trivial example is that the Big Bang happening 13.8 billion years ago and we existing today is the effect. So the Big Bang was the cause, and today this our existence in the universe is the effect of it. So such things are called, this thing actually is termed as causality, or causally connected events. An event which is the primary event which sets the other one into existence can be said to be a cause, and the other one is said to be effect. And the connection is what is called causality. And these events are called causally connected events. I'm familiarizing you with this so we can understand in a better way. So here, it is generally explained by the Minkowski metric. And there's an expression, mathematical expression, which lays down the line element in such cases. So you're able to see here that there's another time differential with some spatial coordinates, namely x, y, of course. So through a visual representation, I've tried to depict some of the major things in this. So here you're able to see a cone, right? There's an upper cone, which is green in color, and the down one is blue in color. And there's a point in origin where the two meet exactly. This point is the origin, or you can simply infer that as the present, absolute present. There is where we are right now. The blue one, however, it is the past, absolute past. It always contains events. All the events in this blue cone will be the one which were there and have affected our presence today. One thing important to notice is that the events in the light cone are necessarily causally connected. So you can say that whatever event were there in past, they have led down to this one event that is the present today. And from the present, all the set of events that it can actually interact with, we can say, or it can influence. For example, you sleeping today and getting up tomorrow. These two events are causally connected. So unless you sleep, how can you wake up? So that's that kind of thing you can simply think. So those sort of things can be taken into account in order to understand that from the past there might be several possibilities, and all those events which are possible, which can be possibly influenced. And for example, you are writing a paper today, you have exam, and tomorrow or maybe you can say a month after is this the result is arriving, of course. So those two events are causally connected. The results may be announced earlier or maybe announced later. So that is the three possibilities. One is intact, one is preponed, or one is it's postponing. So this is what is causally connected events to mean. But however, you were able to see that the right insight to this that there is an absolute present, and then it can affect several events, it can influence on. They all lie in this green cone. However, you are any event which is happening outside this light cone. For example, for a person specific, I'm drawing down a light cone. Then all the set of events that happened in the past and affected today, the present, and all the events will happen now in the present and will affect the future. They always lie in this light cone, because Einstein showed that there's the faster than the light speed travel is not possible, and that is what this the light cone's edges. For example, you're able to see this green line here. That is what it bars. So all the events, all the set of events that have to occur and follow the causality have to occur in the confines of this cone, in the confines of this light cone. Any event, for example, here, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q5, Q4, for example, these all events, they lie outside the light cone, and therefore you can say that these events are where if you want to influence them, if your present has to influence them, then the information must be transmitted to them. That is possible, but the information must be transmitted faster than speed of light, which is in fact not possible under the confines of special relativity in general. So this is what would mean that these all events which lie outside the light cone, cannot be, they do not have any interaction with this your own with your own very future, absolute future or absolute past. They don't really have any effect on you. So here I've simply laid down some of these things, like what is the space-like separation between events. In this above equation, you were able to see as the spatial coordinates would dominate. For example, in the case if I were to take, let's say P5, the point P5 and P6, if those are two events, okay? So right now they're of course they're lying outside the light cone, but we can simply just take that for an example. Like if I were to take P5 and P6, here the time coordinate is 0. So you will simply be able to infer that in this mathematical equation, the spatial coordinates will be dominant. So this, of course, the whole equation, it will be greater than 0. Such event separation is known as space-like. So there's more separation through space than, and not actually, would mean that from the frame of reference of some observer, you'll be able to say that these two events have happened at different places, but simultaneously, more or less simultaneously, a very little difference, which is kind of negligible. Other point is the time lag separation between two events. So it's like the events might take place in accordance with an observer, but not simultaneously. But however, they will happen from the frame of reference of that particular observer at the very same or literally negligibly same location, but they will be separated by a time difference. There will be some difference in the event happening. However, the null separation and the most, you can say, kind of complex to comprehend of all is this null separation. It is depicted by events P3 and P4 right here, which lie on the edge of the light cone. And I'm simply about to tell you this green line at the edge of the light cone. What it is representing is it is representing the speed of light. So that is how it is happening. And you can simply see that it is inclined at an angle of 45 degrees. That is the condition, strict condition for this diagram to work. The light rays will always travel at 45 degrees angle. So that is the path that is taken by light. So you can say any event which is happening and has an effect on some other event in the future or from the past on the present. Certainly, at the edges of this line, what it's trying to show is that only light is able to, of course, travel at the speed of light, and nothing else can travel at the speed of light. So it is the only thing which can travel. But there is one, it comes at a cost that once as you travel at speed of light, there's no meaning. There's no meaning to talk about the relative motion in time. There's no time which flows. So certainly the time comes to halt, and you will not be able. So certainly it is of course a considered notion that photons do not experience time. Of course, from them, for them in their frame of reference, from moving from one point to the other, it is like it takes them no time. In blink of an eye, they can be there. Although from our perspective, a star is 100 billion light years away. Its light takes about 100 billion years to reach us. But the photons, it was just a blink of an eye. It was actually as if there was no time elapsed. So certainly, that is how it's happening. So therefore, it is kind of forbidden for the events that us, the people, all the ordinary matter, or all the things, since they cannot travel at the speed of light. So all the set of events are confined to be present inside this cone, be it the absolute past or absolute future. Now, however, for example, here you will be able to see that you might be able to consider several hundred years from the past, or from the past or from the future, and you can simply convert them into this light cone of yours. But you can scale them up. Since here, I will try to link this. The conformal transformation come into play when used by Sir Roger Penrose. You can see that the light rays will always be at an inclined at an angle of 45 degrees. So that is something which will remain untempered. It is undisturbed. But however, you can simply scale up the light cone, and therefore you will be able to include more of the future or more of the past inside the light cone, which will help you get an insight about how the events were influenced. So basically, we can even reach the infinite future or infinite past through the very application of this. Next slide. All right. So now let's discuss about this very concept called trap surface that we just saw earlier. Here, you can simply see in the diagram, I just simply told you about this circle, which is two-dimensional. So trap surfaces are actually two-dimensional in nature, and they have a property. This mathematical modeling of trap surface was intentionally did so that we can actually prove the existence of a singularity. So what it does is that it has the property that all the light rays which are orthogonal to its surface, you can say if that is a circle, all the light rays that will be orthogonal to its surface, they will always converge at this one point right forward. That is singularity. And another thing is that they will always travel forward in time. There is another general description about these trap surfaces. So here you can simply see that when the matter starts to collapsing and has surpassed from this, there's a circle, white circle, which is named the trap surface. So that circle, once the light rays coming from outside or the matter collapsing in, once it surpasses it orthogonally, it has to inevitably collapse onto the singularity. It will always converge at the singularity. So you can say that all will now exist at a single moment in time. As I just said, it has to move forward in time. You can simply see at the left of the diagram, there's depicted that time moves always straight. So as you move towards the singularity, you're moving ahead in time. Here inside the black hole, interestingly, space and time, they switch roles. So now you can say as you move, example in this world, as if you were moving, you were free to move in space. Now there you're moving actually ahead in time. So this was another consequence, intentional consequence, that this is why the black holes are inescapable. There you can just go inside the black hole, but once you have surpassed the event horizon, and of course the event horizons and the black hole's interior will contain these trap surfaces, which will bring you inevitably. They will converge you at the singularity, and you will of course move forward in time. So the inescapability of black holes can be inferred that since you cannot move backwards in time, because that is a thing which is about the faster than light speed travel, and that is not achievable, and therefore it is not possible to travel backwards in time now. And therefore, since time only runs in one direction, you will never be able to come out of the black hole from the one universe that you went in from. So this is how exactly the trap surfaces help demonstrating the very idea that once a trap surface is formed, that will eventually lead you to the singularity. All the matter collapsing in, they will direct it and converge them at the singularity. And this whole trap surfaces, this is just a segment which is represented here of the black hole. That's just a segment. You can simply imagine trap surfaces to cover whole of this black hole. So essentially, there's no chance for any matter or any outside information to fall once it falls in to escape it, the black hole. And certainly, if you're able to see the light cones, which are small light cones, which are visible to the observer, you can simply say that once it falls in, it is actually changing its orientation. First of all, it was straight, then it changed the orientation. It is so because once it falls in and it moves towards the event horizon, you can say, for example, an observer is falling towards the event horizon. That is what the light cone is telling us that that is the light cone of the observer specific of a specific observer. And as the observer is falling towards the event horizon, all the now the future, of course, since it is the gravitational pull will be essentially high enough. So now you can say all the light rays which were or the events which can now happen from this present in the future, his destiny will now be to lie inside the black hole because of the immense gravitational pull. So the light cone is tilted in mathematical discussion. You can simply see in the diagram just to generalize this idea that now this inevitably will end up in a black hole, and therefore the future of this lies inside the black hole. Therefore, you can simply see that in this diagram, that the future of this light cone, the absolute future that lies inside and tilts and lies inside the event horizon, because the event horizon, once you trespass it, it is inescapable. Once you go in, you are never really coming out. So now your only destiny is to fall inside the black hole and get towards the singularity, and of course, all the matter will be concentrated there. And certainly, once the observer falls completely in, the light cone of such an observer can be completely rotated by an angle of 90 degree, because as just I said, space and time they switch roles. So previously, if the y-axis for certain, for example, the y-axis was giving you the idea about time, and this was a spatial x-axis. So now they will simply switch roles, or certainly this way, that now the spatial dimensions, the one that were representing, for example, the x-axis now will be the time. So that is to mathematically and in practice to show that that is how the light cone will tilt, and that is how we can infer that now time and space have switched roles, and it is quite just like in here for us who are able to move in spatial coordinates. It is difficult for us to freely move in time inside black hole. It is not possible for you since time and space have switched roles. So it's not possible now for you to freely move in spatial dimensions. That is in the length, breadth, or height. It is just not possible for you to move there. The only direction you can move in is time, and that also goes in just forward direction, that is towards the singularity. All right, next slide. So another the application, of course, this was a sort of a mathematical construct that was applied on trap surfaces, and that helped to maintain that some of the strict conditions. That is, conformal transformations must be followed. As I just told you earlier, that you, for example, you have two lines, and they're certainly inclined in some sort of a definite angle, be it 45 degrees. So when you scale them up to even 100 meters each line, but the angle between them at which they are inclined, it will simply remain intact, undisturbed. So this, as I told you, and it's a linkage with light cone, that you will certainly be able to include the infinite future and infinite past too. So it is quite easy from the usage of conformal transformations and the trap surfaces. And certainly there's another third condition, that the collapsing matter, which has to form a black hole, which is undergoing the gravitational collapse, it has to have a positive energy density. This is another, you can say simply an assumption, which has to be taken into account since we are talking about formation of singularity. So the trap surfaces, conformal transformations involved, and the positive energy density should be exhibited by this matter collapsing. The conformal transformations applying on that, since the light cone will now be able to include the infinite future too. Light is coming, for example, for some sort of an event, light rays coming from the future or even the past. You will be able to see that certainly they all will have to end up. Even this Penrose diagram, you'll be able to see that they have to certainly converge at this singularity that is above there. Actually, that's a ring singularity since it's a rotating mass. But that is why it is depicted in such a zigzag way. And therefore, it is the quite um essential for these three things: the conformal transformations applied on the light cones or the events in there, so that you can simply scale them up, but the angles will simply remain same, and that helps us to show that light rays will always all these light rays in the vicinity of the black hole will always fall inside it. All the matter that collapses also falls inside it, and once a trap surface is formed, so this, working hand in hand, will always lead to the formation of a singularity. And then, of course, when some other information or matter just passes the event horizon, once the event horizon is formed, then it is inevitably that will inevitably lead to the formation of a singularity. It is impossible to stop the formation of a singularity, and this is how Sir Roger Penrose was able to prove that just by using the equations of general relativity and a few mathematical concepts, it's completely, since the matter has a positive energy density, all it had to have just a positive energy density, and it should follow these conditions should be consistent with conformal transformations and the formation of trap surfaces. All these taken into account and working hand in hand will always lead to a formation of singularity, which is under the confines of general theory of relativity, for which he was rewarded the Nobel Prize. This is how this work of Sir Roger Penrose has been concluded. Now I will request my companion Jatin to take over. So Jatin, over to you now.
Okay. So before beginning about the work of other two Nobel laureates of in this 2020, namely Andrea Ghez and Bernard Genzel, I would like to share a brief background about when this all began, and then about the earlier approaches which were used by several astronomers at that time, and then what were the solutions, the proper solutions which were adapted by the two different teams led by Gais and Genzel, which led them to earn the Nobel Prize of 2020. Slide, please. Okay. So, as mentioned by Arnav, at least before 1950s, Einstein's general theory of relativity was thought of some sort of scientific curiosity, which has very little to do with the actual behavior of nature, and specifically the black holes. It was in 1931 when Karl Jansky, known as one of the here I have shown a picture of. Okay. So several objects of such radio sources were observed, and which is known to be the objects were So after deep analysis, astronomers came to know that these data, and so it should not be a star. Okay. Another factor which was taken into account was the per velocity of 47,000 kilometer per second. It's really huge. Okay. So, and again, it was far more beyond the velocity of any known star. Since no known theory in physics could account such an extreme observations, source is actually a supermassive black hole could be the only explanation for the quasars, the results which were obtained. Now, coming in 1975 is said to be the golden era for general relativity, as it was this period when the theoretical
हेलो जतिन।
हाँ
तुम्हारा तुम्हारा वॉइस ठीक से नहीं आ रहा है।
ओके
तुम्हारा माइक चेक
ठीक
करो।
है तो हाँ एक मिनट अब आवाज आ रहा है
हाँ हाँ ठीक, हाँ ठीक।
ओके सो अभी कहाँ से स्टार्ट करना है मतलब मुझे नहीं पता आवाज कब गया सॉरी हाँ ओके so I'll begin from the first with the beginning itself. Okay, so it was in 1950s when Einstein's general theory of relativity and its solution were regarded as hello आवाज आ रहा है so earlier it was in 1950s when Einstein's general theory of relativity and its solution were regarded as some sort of scientific curiosity and were not taken into deep considerations by the astronomers and scientists at that time. So it was in 1931 when Karl Jansky, also known as the father of some sort of scientific curiosity, uh, which has very little to do with the actual behavior of nature, and specifically the black hole. It was in 1931 when Karl Jansky discovered that the radio signals observed the radio signals from unknown cosmic origin. At first, he suspected that they would be from our own sun, but later, after a few more analysis, he found that the origin of the source has shifted away from the sun. And it is shifted away from the sun to somewhere in the densest part of the Milky Way in the constellation of Sagittarius. He further argued that since the sun and the other stars were not the large emitters of the radio noise, the strange noise may be generated from the interstellar gas and the dust in the galaxy. Later in 1950s, the observation was corrected and hypothesized to be emitted from the electrons in a strong magnetic field. Several objects of such radio noises were also discovered, and one such was the 3C273, which is known to be the optically brightest quasar in the sky from Earth. So, what quasars are basically an extremely luminous objects or star-like objects that have very compact region at the center of a galaxy, and we call this region as active galactic nuclei. After deep analysis, astronomers came to know that these objects are so luminous that it can outshine an entire galaxy. So it was concluded that their extremely luminous objects were definitely not a star, as a star has some certain luminosity limit, which can be derived from the Eddington's luminosity limit. Another important factor which was taken into account was the high redshift in the observed spectrum of that object. The object was found to be redshifted by amount of 15.8%, which after some mathematical calculation accounts to its super velocity of 47,000 kilometers per second. And again, it's far more than the velocity of any known star. Since no known theory physics could describe these strange observations of radio object 3C273, other than the supermassive black hole, it was thus accepted as the only explanation for quasars, and it's still the only theory. The image in the right-hand side, which I have put in the slide, is the Milky Way galaxy with its center, the galactic center, at a region of approximately 1 parsec. So now coming back to the Milky Way and Sagittarius. The period between 1960 and 1975 is termed as the golden era for general relativity, as this was the period when this subject of theory of relativity has entered into the mainstream of theoretical physics. In 1971, a breakthrough in physics took place when Donald Lynden Bell and Martin Rees hypothesized that the center of Milky Way would contain a supermassive black hole on the basis of comparing the mass of quasars to the radiation. In 1974, two astronomers named Bruce Balich and Robert Brown studied the center of Milky Way using US National Radio Astronomy Observatory's radio telescope. They found a small core in this region that was powerfully emitting the radio waves. Brown termed this powerful radio emitting source as Sagittarius A star, where the asterisk sign over A represents that the source is highly ionized. After detailed analysis of the results obtained from the infrared telescope and the previous results, it was then concluded that the Sagittarius A star was really a part of galactic center and not a distant background object. Also, they found in late 1970s that the theoretical mass of Sagittarius A star should be about 5 million times that of our sun or solar masses, and all clumped in a very small volume of space. As there was no direct evidence available, the supermassive black hole concept was still remain a hypothesis. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. So in this section, I would talk to you about what were the earlier approaches which were used by several astronomers before 1990s. The first thing was taken into the account was that as that time the technology was available for the space-based telescope. The main criteria to decide whether to use the ground-based telescope or the space-based one. So ground-based telescope were finally preferred as they were less costly compared to space one and can be easily maintained and upgraded compared to the space one. But the problem with the ground-based telescope is that the light from distant objects will reach to us after passing through the atmosphere, which is turbulent in nature, that blurs the light. This is what we call as the atmospheric distortion. And it's the same phenomena behind what we see in the twinkling of stars as observed from Earth. Thus, it prevents the ground-based telescope from taking a really sharp image of the object in space. In early 1990s, despite of several advancements, the telescopes were insufficient to expertly resolve objects separated by distance comparable to the size of Schwarzschild radius of a possible supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy. However, few theoretical approaches were used to resolve this problem. And so one such approach was the observations of orbit of stars and the interstellar gas, which can be helped to determine the gravitational potential due to the object at the center of a galaxy. So gravitational potential is basically the work per unit mass that would be required to move an object to a particular location from a reference location. One can then infer whether that compact source at the center of the known stellar object could account for observations. Another approach which was used was the black hole mean densities. So they are computed as the ratio of their mass to the volume enclosed within a radius of 3 times Rs. The Rs here represent the Schwarzschild radius, which is 3 times Rs is basically the ISCO radius, or we call it as innermost stable circular orbit. So innermost stable circular orbit is the smallest circular orbit in which a test particle can stably orbit a massive object, and its location depends on the angular momentum of the central object. For the supermassive black hole weighing about 4 million times the solar masses, the density is actually only about 40 times larger than that of water. But when converted to astronomical scales, it was much larger than the density of any known cluster. Thus, the general known strategies were based on determination of mass densities and then comparing this density with the known stellar clusters. So here, the images which I have shown here are the Hubble, are one with Hubble Space Telescope, and the other is of the VLBA, that is Very Large Baseline Array. So after the launch of Hubble Space Telescope, detailed study of active galactic nuclei were taken into account. Apart from that, VLBA are also used in studying the AGN. VLBA is a system of 10 radio telescopes which are remotely operated from their array operations. These 10 radio telescopes work together as an array that forms the longest system in the world and is stretched about approximately 8,600 kilometers. That uses the VI, which is very long baseline interferometry. Talking about the specification, each receiver VLBA consists of parabolic dish antenna diameter of 25 meter along with its adjacent control building as shown in the figure. So far, they have mapped the location and the velocity of the sources with the angular resolution better than a milliarc second. So, next slide, please. Okay. So, after such a brief and descriptive discussion, it's time to talk about the works of two Nobel laureates. Two observational teams, one led by Renard Genzel at Max Planck Institute for Extraterrestrial Physics and other by the Andrea Ghez at University of California, Los Angeles, have been monitoring the galactic center for nearly 3 decades. Genzel's group used the telescope in Chile, operated by the European Southern Observatory, which is ESO, while Ghez and her colleagues used the Keck Observatory, which is in Hawaii. As mentioned earlier, distinguishing individual stars in orbit in the very crowded region at the galactic center requires partial resolution. Obscursion by interstellar dust in the center of Milky Way at optical wavelength with less than a photon per billion penetrating the dust along the line of sight of Earth. Therefore, both the teams carried out the experiments in the near infrared, which is centered at the lambda of 2.2 microns, which was after some test was found to be the best for the observations. At this longer wavelength, the mean free path, which is the distance traveled by particle between successive collisions and here photons, is much larger and thus making the observation feasible. Still, the turbulence remains the problem or one of the greatest challenges for the ground-based telescope. So both the teams initially developed two different solutions to this problem. Next slide. One such technique for such to the solution for turbulence in Earth's atmosphere was speckle imaging in near infrared, which was used by the Ghez team. The principle of this technique is to take large number of short exposure images of astronomical objects that can freeze the variation of atmospheric turbulence. Since resolution of telescope is limited by the size of main mirror, this results in the airy disk. Next slide, please. Here are the results of the what we can say the speckle imaging. The image with the B slide here represents the airy disk. Airy disks are generally the image which is obtained with the best diffraction limit. So series of these observations as can be seen from the image were taken into account that was partially shifted to align the patterns of stars and then added together. The stack of these shifted images provide a sharper and deeper image, ultimately limited by the diffraction. The power of telescope to partially resolve the stars in the central parsec region surrounding the Sagittarius A star, is clear. So here are some specifications which I have mentioned, which describes the image. The first image describes the many combination of many short exposure of image which were taken at exposure time for 0.13 seconds and then clearing the noise clearing and other factors was resolved later. Second technique was sharp camera. This was the technique which was used by Genzel's team. Since advantages of high angular resolution is that the resulting projected velocity vectors of some handful of stars could be determined after the survey of nearly 4 years on the 3.5 meter of a new technology telescope. Genzel's team was able to reach the diffraction limit on the spatial resolution with newly constructed sharp camera. Previous slide. Previous slide. Here in the bottom right corner, the image is of the sharp camera which was used by the Genzel's team, and in the upper right portion is the new technology telescope which was used by the Genzel's team. Next. Next. So this was the projected velocities which I was talking about. It were nearly 39 stars were observed by the sharp camera, and out of which 27 of stars were being observed. The picture shows that several stars with their projected velocities, which we call as their velocities generally, are being mentioned, and what were the what were the velocities at when measured from 2 arc seconds of distance. So there was one limitation with the spectral imaging, that it's only limited to the brighter objects, as we can only capture the objects which have really very good brightness with the exposure technique. So this limitation was then overcome by the adaptive optics. Next slide. This was the adaptive optics which was available to Gay's team by 2000 and Genzel's team at Very Large Telescope by 2003. So this is the technique used for the reference object next to the observation target, either a bright star or even an artificial star. As the image depicts that a laser is fired in the Earth's atmosphere in the outer space with some specifications, and it acts as a laser guide star. When the rays from this star enters to our at turbulent atmosphere, it distorts the light. Then it reaches to the telescope, and then a deformable mirror changes the shape to compensate the for aberrations to known objects using the real-time feedback loop, which enables long-time exposure and creation of much sharper image and deeper images down to the diffraction limits. In the second half of the image, the deformable mirror has adjusted itself to the wavefront of the received star, and then it goes on to the instrument. Here I have used two terminologies which I mentioned earlier. So I would briefly explain these two terminologies: aberrations and diffraction limit. Aberrations is the name assigned to phenomena when rays fail to converge at a single point after passing through lens, while the diffraction limit is the limit of an optical system up to which it can perfectly form the image of the object. The adaptive optics helps in studying the compositions of stars, which comes out to be crucial to the projected radial velocities, in addition to the projected velocities. At ESO, Genzel's group started a program at 8 meter very large telescope. So as I mentioned previously, that they were using the telescope of 3.5 meter in Chile, and now they are working on the 8 meter very large telescope using the adaptive optics. Not only statistical measurements were made with the new technique, but most importantly, individual stars could be accurately monitored in a manageable timescale. Next slide. Okay. So here I have in the left side, it's the star which was named S2, which says that the Sagittarius star, the object of Sagittarius star at the orbit, which is the second near object to the Sagittarius A star, which is orbiting around the Sagittarius A star. So after calculations, it was found that the orbital period for this S2 star is just 16 years. For the sake of comparison, our sun takes 200 million years to complete a full this full orbit around the galactic center in 200 million years. So its pericenter distance, which is the closest distance from Sagittarius A star as observed in the spring of 2002, was about 17 light hours, or 122.64 astronomical units. Again, for the sake of comparison, Pluto's closest distance from the Sun is about 29.7 astronomical units. Next, sorry. Here in the right hand side, the image shows that various stars are orbiting at the center of the galactic. Sorry, at the center, uh, several stars are rotating at a distance when observed from 1 parsec. Agreement between the data of new technology telescopes and Keck's data was amazing. The work of two teams together established that the galactic center contains a highly concentrated mass of nearly 4 million solar masses within the pericenter of S2. This requires a minimum density of 5 into 10 raised to power 15 solar masses per cubic parsec. The mass of centroid lies within the region of plus or minus 2 milliarc seconds of the position of the perfect radio source, Sagittarius A star, which itself has an apparent size of less than 1 astronomical unit. So, 1 astronomical unit is the mean distance from Earth to Sun. Next slide. As you can see here, this is the data which was taken by both the teams till 2003, I guess, where the orbital velocity of only S2 star is taken into account. The black crosses here marks that the Sagittarius A star should be around in this region, and the orbit of star, the crosses represents the orbital the orbit of the that SO2 star, or the S2 star. In the right part of the image, it shows the velocity of this S2 star when measured from the data which were received and is compiled over sorry, it's compiled till 2010. Sorry, next slide. This the data which I have shown in this slide is the analysis of 26 years of research from 1992 to 2018. Clearly, now the Sagittarius A star, the position of Sagittarius A star after analyzing most of the data has been fixed, and the orbital period, the position in the orbit of that star S2 has been recorded and is mentioned, is marked by various colors, and the reference of years are being mentioned. So a direct interpretation, while after concluding all this, a direct interpretation of all these observations is that the compact object at the galactic center is compatible with being a supermassive black hole. Further support for this conclusion came from the fact that near infrared and X-ray flares were observed from the same position, which can be naturally ascribed as the massive black hole. So this was the conclusion data which was received and analyzed by both the teams. Next slide. Here are the references which he used to study about our talk, and we got to know a lot of things from these references. Thank you for listening.
Hello, am I audible? Hello. Okay, so thank you Arnav and Jatin for this wonderful talk. I the topic was a bit hard, but you both done very well. And now we are requesting any questions from public who are watching from YouTube. So they can comment in the comment section. So if anybody has any question, they can raise in the comment section. Feel free to ask any type of questions regarding any terms or anything.
Hello, Arnav. So you can see the question.
जी भैया.
What is the application of this discovery means, or what will be its advantage and further development in it?
Well, for now, I will not be able to tell about the advantage and development of it, but you can say uh,
No, you just continue with the
first
question.
of all, I will simply continue with the first question actually. First of all, so the thing is, now you can say this discovery will mean that now certainly we are able to hunt for black holes. Okay, so previously when Penrose did not set out with his own work, so you can say that there was no established framework that the singularities could actually occur. So black holes was simply meant to be hypothetical. But now after this Penrose's work, it was quite, you can say, sensible. It makes sense to look for them. Finally, out in the universe, it is quite sensible that we should look for them. And certainly, maybe in the far future, not now, of course, we certainly will be able to study them well more appropriately. Because, of course, you know that any research does not go long without any proper explanation about it. So certainly, Penrose's discovery fueled kind of the very sense of looking for them on a even in the future and to study the black holes and continue this field in the study for black holes. What was the next question exactly?
The second question is what mathematical work done by Penrose after 2018?
Okay. I'm sorry to disappoint, but I'm not familiar with that work. As it was just a popular talk, so I was just familiar with this Nobel Prize and what led to the Nobel Prize. So,
Right.
any questions
Question is,
else from my
can
part?
you please
Or Jatin?
explain the difference between ring singularity and point singularity?
Okay. Uh, well, it might be quite. I can actually try to give you an insight about that, though not going in deep because I don't really know how this mathematically how they behave and what would be their physical significance. As I told you, one major difference is that point-like singularity necessarily does not occupy any volume. Well, in ideal cases, the point singularity does have a zero volume, therefore infinite density and are really more complex to comprehend. While a ring singularity is far away from that and just to does make any sense. You can say that the black holes can contain such singularities, and matter is of course considered in this in such a way that it forms a ring. You can actually think of it the ring and surrounded by a torus-shaped inner horizon. So. Of course, I'll not be able to give you complete proof about that, but you might look for it on the internet. Certainly, some suggestions. For example, certain discoveries from Sir Stephen Hawking and late Sir Stephen Hawking and Sir Penrose. They also suggest that these ring singularities, in fact, might be a working model for real black hole as well as the connection between the multiverse, multiversal theory. You can say that they work as a portal, these ring singularities, and that is something they can be thought of as on a basis of a separation, while the point-like singularity are more or less ideal cases and still not well accepted models for black hole.
It's like the ring singularity happens in the rotating black holes,
Rotating
which
black holes, exactly.
right. There's one question for Jatin. Is Jatin online? Jatin? Okay, till then we take next question. Jatin will be online shortly.
All right.
What are your opinions
I would
regarding
like
this?
to.
Yeah.
All right. So you can say that this profound discovery, of course, now has established a base. Of course, it already had established a base back then because Penrose set out with his framework, and it was completed by the end of 1970. It was completely agreed that black holes might be real. Of course, the first one to be ever discovered was the Cygnus one. So since then, and of course, even in the last year, 2019, the first image of black hole was released. So now we can actually start to think that it is quite sensible to work in this field of black holes. And I'm of course an aspiring astrophysicist. I want to become an astrophysicist in the future. So it has a considerable effect on me. Of course, in terms of creating a sense to look for them. And of course, now as I said that there are several things to think about black holes in terms of like time travel and more concepts which are associated with that. So I guess that would provide me a vast scope to choose any one of them and work on it, be it the multiversal correction through black holes working as a portal or maybe a wormhole or making us to easier for us to time travel or some inspirational ideas from them uh, will maybe definitely help me in the future. I would like to pursue this.
Right. Next question is what does Amal Kumar Rai Chaudhary's equation explain, which was used by Penrose in his Nobel-winning work?
Okay. Well, sorry to disappoint again. I'm not exactly familiar with the equation, though I heard that yes, Samuel Kumar Rajawadi's equation was used by Sir Penrose and was also analyzed by Stephen Hawking by developing the very idea for black holes when certainly no one was believing. But I'm significantly not familiar with the equation and how does it work.
Right. Okay. So, is there any question? Other questions? Please ask. Is Jatin online or it's still? Yeah. Okay. Jatin, please unmute yourself. Yeah. Jatin, there's a question for you. Can
Okay.
you please explain how mirror can deform as you have showed in the adaptive optics? So,
Mhm.
can you please explain that, how what are the
Yeah.
mirrors?
No, I know a bit about it. Could you please that show the slide where I have this adaptive
Yeah.
optics image?
A minute.
Hmm.